Hey everybody, welcome back to the Western Southerner YouTube channel. Today I'm going to tell you how to buy a sleeping bag. My name's Ted and I spent over 1,000 nights doing guiding work in the Appalachian Mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and even in Alaska for a little while. So I've spent quite a bit of time around sleeping bags. Stay tuned. I would argue that you buy a sleeping bag for the person first and the application second. And what I mean by that is that different people sleep differently. They run hot, they run cold. What they're doing and how they're using a sleeping bag kind of depends on the person. The first thing I like to figure out is like whether or not someone is a hot or a cold sleeper. Myself, I'm actually a cold sleeper, and so like I need a sleeping bag that's rated much warmer than what some other people might need. On the other hand, my wife, she's like super hot. She's a super hot sleeper, right? So, she's like a furnace and she doesn't need the same amount of insulation in a sleeping bag that I need at night. Figuring out if you're a hot or a cold sleeper is the first thing. That's the main thing. So the second thing, right, is the good old down versus synthetic argument. Obviously, synthetic's good if you're in a rainy environment. If down gets wet, it can absorb moisture and it reduces its ability to insulate. Everybody knows that. That's a no-brainer. That being said, I use synthetic bags for a really, really long time. And I think I've had like 5 or 6 over the last, 20 or 30 years or whatever. And none of the synthetic bags were anywhere near as comfortable for me as down bags. And so I got to where I really preferred, using down bags. I don't even have any of my synthetic bags anymore. I kind of threw them away, gave them the Goodwill. They were all manky, they were broken down, the insulation went flat. So, I spent a lot of money on a lot of synthetic sleeping bags. And none of them really just lasted. This is a down bag I've had. This bag is actually, I think it's 13 years old at this point. It's 650 fill. It's a 0-degree bag. It's been used many, 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 many nights in the field. And this bag, it just doesn't stop. 650 fill isn't like the warmest thing. And for me, even though this is rated to 0, it's good until, maybe 15 degrees. And then I start to get a little bit chilly. I've spent some really, really cold nights in this thing in Colorado and Idaho, and it's 0 degrees. I think this thing would be kind of miserable, at least for me. For a hot sleeper, this might be all they need. It might be fine. This is my summer bag. Hike and Bike is the company. You get these off Amazon. My wife was the first person to have one of these. They're like $100. Great little sleeping bag, especially for the summer. 650 down. This is rated to 32 degrees, but again, I'm a cold sleeper, so if it's 50 degrees, that's about as low as I'll take this bag. But it's lightweight. It's a pretty good construction, and you can't beat the price point. For a summer bag, I'm okay with getting something cheaper. Obviously, the stakes are lower in the summertime, so I don't worry about it too much. So recently I was shopping for a real heavy duty winter bag. I went with a Mountain Hardwear bag. It's actually a -40. It's 850 fill down. I don't know if I would want to spend a night in -40 in it, but I think it would take care of me up to about -20 degrees pretty well. If I had to shelter a storm in it and it was really, really cold, I would probably survive. But when you get into those negative temperatures, man, that's really cold stuff, especially spending the night out. I think it's easy to kind of overestimate how cold it is. You might think it's -20, it's probably like 0. Even 0 degrees is really, really cold in my opinion. Another thing about this Mountain Hardwear bags, it has a shell that's like Gore-Tex Infindium, I believe it's called. And that's like a highly water resistant and breathable layer. It's not like having a bivy sack on your bag. It might be a little better than a bivy sack because it probably breathes better. Gives you a good water resistant surface. You have to keep in mind too, when it's that cold, all the water's frozen, right? So if you get snow on it, a lot of times you can just kind of brush it off and you don't have to worry about it soaking through. Okay, so one thing you might want to consider if you have a down bag is, getting the old bivy sack, right? This is a Outdoor Research bivy. I bought it when I bought that 0 degree down bag. So I spent a whole lot of nights using this thing out in really rainy, cold weather, some snow as well. This thing's pretty breathable, works pretty well. It's pretty old at this point. It's kind of heavy, right? I mean, it probably weighs a good, pound and a half, maybe 2 pounds. Anymore these days, the new down bags, especially the ones with those shells, it probably is almost as waterproof as this thing, and probably quite a bit more breathable. The other piece to consider is that a lot of down now, they treat it and they make it water resistant. And, my understanding of that water resistant down is that it actually works really well, and it doesn't soak up water. So kind of the last piece I'll say about a down bag is we'll say, oh my gosh, well, if you get it wet, it's gonna you're gonna freeze to death, and you won't make it through the night. And years ago, a good friend of mine, I was kind of talking to him, and he looked at me and he said, yeah, Ted, but like, when's the last time you got your down sleeping bag that wet? And my answer was, well, never. We had both spent hundreds of nights in the field by that point. That was a major deciding factor, because I thought, oh, wait a minute. The chances of me actually getting this thing wet are pretty low, and there's obviously some precautions I can take. So whenever I'm carrying a down bag, I always use a good waterproof stuff sack. I had one made of Event for a long time. I think I've still got it somewhere. And it actually even had like a roll down top that you would buckle. Event's kind of like Gore-Tex. It's a waterproof, breathable membrane. You can get the good old fashioned kind of nylon with the polyurethane coating. That usually works fine. But I do recommend, using one of those waterproof sacks to keep your sleeping bag in. So I think the decision on whether or not to use a down or synthetic sleeping bag is also influenced by a person's experience. So if you're a person that has a lot of experience in the backcountry, maybe you know some tips and tricks to keep your bag dry, or to maybe even dry it out if you do happen to get it wet. One thing to consider as well is just kind of the amount that you're going to use a sleeping bag. All the synthetic sleeping bags I had, when I threw them away, they were just totally flat. The insulation had compressed. They were useless. They were clammy. They weren't really that comfortable to sleep in. And frankly, they weren't very warm. Nowadays, I'm sure that the technology's gotten better, and they probably last longer. But the down sleeping bags just seem to really last a very long time, maybe 20 years. So another thing to consider when buying a sleeping bag is how much room do you want? I like the kind of expedition cut bags, the bigger bags. You can kind of move around a little bit. Obviously, those weigh more, and you have to take that into account. But the idea of an expedition cut bag is that sometimes you need to keep things in your sleeping bag with your person to keep them from like freezing at night. Radios, batteries, certain medical things. I always recommend getting in a sleeping bag and trying it on if you have a chance. I bought this nice Mountain Hardwear 0 degree bag for my wife, and she prefers, to have more room, and it's just a little bit snug. It's a little bit tight for her. When I hold it up, it actually looks more like a sleeping bag for a kid, than a grown woman. So, it's for a kid, this would be a great sleeping bag, but it's a little bit tight, for her. Everybody probably already knows this, but always keep your sleeping bag in a big mesh bag, right? If you keep it in a compression sack, it's going to crush it down and ruin the loft. Don't put it in a trash bag, right? It needs to be able to like breathe and get some air and not have moisture accumulate. Hang it up in a closet, throw it on the floor. Anything's better than having it, compressed into a little ball in the stuff sack all the time. Okay, so people make these, sleeping bag liners, right? They make a fleece sleeping bag liner. I've seen ones out of like microfiber. I've seen them out of silk, and I've actually had all three of those different things. I have mixed results with those. The fleece, especially for how bulky and big it is, it just was not worth hauling around. I definitely did that. So, the small little microfiber ones and silk ones, I had those for a while. I've still got a silk one and a microfiber one. You know, they work okay. Maybe they give you an extra 5 degrees, but really, I mean, again, just getting like a solid kind of down sleeping bag works so much better in my opinion. So I had a friend, and in the wintertime, he actually used to carry 2 summertime down sleeping bags, and that was his system. And I mean, he was always really warm. One was cut a little bit bigger, maybe it was a long, and he would fit the other one inside of it, and he would sleep in that. And you know, he did that for years and years out in the field. So that's something to consider. You know, the last piece I'll talk about is there's all these kind of like specialty bags and, you know, quilts nowadays. You know, they attach their sleeping pad to it, or all the insulation's on the top of the bag and none's on the bottom, because, you know, you don't need the insulation necessarily on the bottom if your pad is insulating you. And, you know, all that's great. I like a good old fashioned mommy sleeping bag. You know, you get in there, you zip it up. If it's really cold, you put the hood on. If it's not that cold, you take the hood off. But it's there in case you need it. So I hope this is helpful to someone. Obviously, if you're just going camping in the summertime, you know, you don't have to put a whole lot of thought into this. You throw some blankets or like a Walmart sleeping bag in the car and get the heck out there and have some fun. You know, when you're getting into like, you know, 30, 20 degrees and below that, I think you really have to put a little bit of thought into this stuff, because, you know, those temperatures can be dangerous. And, you know, if you're uncomfortable and you just freeze to death all night, then you're never going to go camping again, right? You're just going to have a miserable experience and be like, well, I'll never do that again. So if this is helpful, you know, hit like and subscribe. Feel free to add a comment, you know, tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, whatever you want to do as far as that's concerned. And stay tuned for some more videos. Thanks. Take care.